Hey everybody, welcome to Bill Sky, the C++ guy. And today we're going to start our adventure with operator overloading. And I could do a single video 3 hours long, but I decided not to do that. What we're going to do is we're going to do operator overloading for the increment operators and decrement operators. And we'll talk about what operator overloading even means. And then we're going to do operator overloading for simple function or for simple mathematical operations like addition, subtraction, assignment, copying, multiplication, division. That's going to be in another video. And then we're going to do another video on overloading the stream operators, like for cout, for count, where you have the less than. You could even do it for the greater than. But we're going to do that in another video. But we're going to do incrementers and decrementers. We're going to have a little explanation of that first, and then we're going to go ahead and do a demo of it. I'm going to walk you through the whole thing, do some real code, have some real fun. So let's get right to it. Okay, so I've got Linux up here. Now you can use Windows, it doesn't matter. I prefer Linux. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the Eclipse Integrated Development Environment. And the reason that I'm doing that is because it really assists in object-oriented programming, where a tool like Visual Studio Code really is not really made for the lower level languages. I mean, you can do it, and I've used Visual Studio Code quite a bit, but Eclipse really is written by developers for doing object-oriented coding. You're going to see that if you don't have any experience with Eclipse. You're going to see a good demo of it today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new project. And I'm going to create a C++ project. And we're going to call this one operator increment decrement overloading. And again, you can create this within any integrated development environment you'd like. But Eclipse does a pretty good job here. Okay, so if you've seen any of my other programming videos, you're going to know that I always say program ending. And the reason I do that, for those of you that haven't seen any of my other videos, is that you know that the program has ended at the very last line, the line right before return 0, and there weren't any problems. So I always do that. And I always go ahead and build it just to make sure everything's looking good. Okay, there it is. Okay. Now, increment and decrement. Let's talk about those again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable, some integer. I'm going to make it equal to 0. Now, what is increment and what are the increment and decrement operators? Well, the increment operator is plus plus. So if I say some integer plus plus, that means simply increment it by 1. So if I say cout some integer plus plus, what is this going to do? Well, what this is going to do, this is what we call a postfix operator. So some integer plus, actually before we do that, let's just go ahead and print out some integer. And we'll talk about post and pre in just a moment. Okay, so we're going to print it before the increment and then after the increment. And let's take a look at what that does. There we go. So it started at 0, so it printed 0 on the cout, and then it incremented it right here, and then it printed the 1 because it was now incremented by 1. And it's the same thing with decrement. You could say some integer minus minus, and then we could just simply copy that, and it should go back down to 0. And that's the increment and decrement operator. And let's play it. And then it goes 0, 1, 0. Okay. So very simple. You can't say plus plus 3. It's either plus plus, which is 1, or minus minus, which is minus 1. So that's how that works. Now I did mention something about post and prefix, incrementer and decrementer. And what that means is that if I say cout some integer plus plus, this is what we call a postfix incrementer, postfix operator, because it happens post doing something. So in this case, if you notice, it's going to be 0 when it reaches line 24 of our code here. But what is this doing right here? Well, what it's going to do is it's going to print some integer, which is going to be 0. Then it's going to increment some integer. And the reason why it increments it after it does the cout is because it's post. It means do it after. Do it post the cout. And then if I say cout some integer, you should see the number 1. So let's go ahead and build and run this. Okay, here we go. So when we added 1 to 0, we got a 1. So you can see it right there. We then subtracted 1 from it, and we got a 0, which you see right there. And then when we said cout some integer plus plus, it printed that 0. You can see that 0 right there. It printed the 0. It printed some integer, and then it incremented it. So when we printed it again, when we did a cout again, it's now 1 again. So that's a postfix operator. And why am I showing you that? Because it's actually pretty important for this discussion. Okay, so let's look at a prefix operator. So what does a prefix operator do? So I'm going to say cout plus plus some integer. And I'm going to say cout some integer. Now what does the prefix operator plus plus do? What that does is before the operations of cout, it adds 1. It does the increment first, then it does the cout. So if you see right here, it's a 1. What will be this cout? Based on what I just said, it'll add 1 to some integer first, then it'll cout it, so it should be 2. So then if we cout it again, it'll be 2. So let's go ahead and save and build and run this. And again, you could do this with any IDE. All right, here we go. So our guess was right. So right here, it's the postfix, so it was 0. It printed 0 again, then it added 1. And we printed that right there. And then we said cout some integer. There's that 1. That's the postfix. The prefix says, so some integer has a value of 1. The prefix operator says add 1 to it and then do the cout. So you can see the 2 right there. And then we verified that it actually was a 2, and there's our 2. So that's a quick review of the increment and decrement operators, both prefix and postfix. That is probably the best way I've ever, that's just the way I taught it in school, and students really seem to understand it that way. Okay, so let's go ahead and now talk about this whole idea of increment and decrement operator overloading. Now this is an object-oriented thing. Actually, you probably could do it, but no, probably not. It's an we want to do it as a object-oriented thing. So what we're going to do is I'm going to come down here to SRC and I'm going to right-click on that, and I'm going to select New Class. Now I'm doing this with Eclipse, so if you don't have Eclipse running, you're going to have to create your own HPP and CPP files. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a neat little class called Puppy Dog, just because I love dogs. And I'm going to put PP at the end of the header file, just to indicate that it's a C++ only header file. It cannot be used in C. I'm going to say Finish. And right there. So there's our class definition, puppydog.hpp. Now notice Eclipse added the constructor and the destructor to that. It also added it to the code in the CPP file. So I always like to keep the definition, or I should say I'm having a senior moment here, the identification of the functions in a different place than the actual definition of them. So I might have gotten those terms wrong, sorry about that, but I actually like to put the function implementation there and the function definition inside of the HPP file. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a private member. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about public and private, you might want to take a look at my object-oriented video on this subject, just so if you don't understand this. So I'm going to create a private section here, and I'm going to create a variable called weight in ounces. So So there's that. And then in the CPP, in the constructor, I'm just going to initialize that to 0. All right, great. Now, because I put these in private, I would like to create, I put this in private, I would like to create the accessors and mutators, or the getters and setters. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to source, and I'm going to say generate getters and setters. Again, this is Eclipse. Not every IDE has this. It found that weight in ounces was new. I like to separate the definition from the declaration. Those are the right terms. Click OK. And it went ahead and it put the accessor, the get weight, and the mutator, the set weight. It put those functions in the CPP file. The HPP file has the declarations of those, so we're all set. So we can now access that. Okay, so now the next thing I want to do is I want to go into my main, and I'm going to create an include file, puppydog.hpp. Now, the reason I'm using include double quotes instead of the less than greater than is because I haven't put this directory in the include path. So I say, or I haven't put it in the project definition. So I'm going to go ahead and just say double quote, which means look in the same directory instead of the greater than and less than sign. So let's go ahead and build that and make sure everything is copacetic. Okay, great. And now let's go ahead and create a new object. Let's create a new puppy object. So I'm going to create a new variable. I'm going to say puppy dog. Now I love using pointers, and pointers are really the way you should be doing this here. So I'm going to say puppy dog puppy1 equals new puppy dog. And I put the open and close parentheses to make sure that the constructor is actually executed. Okay, so I set that up, and now let's go ahead and down here in our code, let's go ahead and set up some data. So I'm going to say puppy1 dot set weight. I'm going to make it, it's a very, very small puppy. I'm going to make it a pound, 16 ounces. Okay? And then I'm going to say cout the puppy weighs puppy1 dot get ounces. Okay, now this is all in preparation to get ready for the operator overloading of increment and decrement. And so without those, this is what I would have to do. So I'm going to go ahead. Now I'm going to save and build this just to make sure I don't have any syntax errors. I'm going to run it just to make sure. And there's our 16-ounce puppy. Now one thing I did forget, oops, memory leak. I forgot to delete puppy1. Okay, there we go. Didn't really cause any problems, but it definitely will. You don't want to have memory leaks in your code. Okay, so what if I want to add, you know, it's 6 months later, my puppy's gotten heavier. What if I want to add 10 to my puppy's weight? So I would have to say puppy1 dot set weight puppy1 dot get weight plus 10 ounces. It's doable. I've written code like this many, many times, but it's a little bit ugly. I'll get some argument on that. That's fine. Okay. But it works. So my puppy starts off at 16 ounces, then my puppy weighs 26 ounces. Now, this might actually be kind of a bad example because I'm adding 10. If I just change this to 1, because remember, increment and decrement, those actually just add 1 or subtract 1. So let's go ahead and just do it by 1. And you can see 16 ounces and 17 ounces. If I want to subtract it, the beauty of copy and paste, if I want to subtract it, works great. So the puppy was 16 ounces, then I added 1 to it to 17 ounces, then I subtracted 1 from it. Now, this code works. There's nothing wrong with this code. I would probably argue that this code might not be very efficient because I'm having to do all kinds of functions here. Set weight, get weight, I'm having to do a get weight inside of a set weight. I could have all kinds of issues here, really mainly performance. Now with a small little program like this, you're really not going to have a problem with it, but let's make it nicer. Wouldn't it be nicer if I could just do something like this? Puppy1++. Puppy1++. Let's add one of the puppy's weight. Wouldn't that be really neat? That'd be really cool to do something like that. And that's what we call operator overloading. You have a class, in this case puppy dog, and I want to overload the operator plus or minus, and I can do the postfix or I can do the prefix. It doesn't matter. I can do either one. We're going to do both in this video. So let's go ahead and set that up. Now, before we do that, let's see what happens if I do that. So there's puppy1++. No problem. It's going to run. It's going to, look at what happened here. We have a little bit of a problem. So what happened is that I didn't see my program ending have a nice day. That immediately told me there was a problem with my code. My code did not end at the end of the program, even though it wasn't really, it has an exit value of -1, but I had to look for that. But because I have my cout program ending, it is not a problem. Why did it just die? Well, the reason it died is because if I add 1 to puppy1, because puppy1 is a pointer to a puppy, it's adding 1 to the address of puppy1, and then down here it deletes it. And it's trying to delete an object pointer, is trying to delete an object that the pointer is pointing to that is no longer there because we're off. Our address is off. So it died right there. And that's why this cout program ending is so important. You don't have to say have a nice day. You can say go stick a corn cob. I don't care. But just as long as you have some kind of a message that says the program's ending, it really, really helps out. So that just will not work because it's a pointer. So let's go ahead, and I don't want to have to do things like this anymore where I have functions within functions. Let's overload the ++ operator. Now to do that, I'm going to go into the puppydog.hpp file, and I'm simply going to say, and I actually believe I'm going to just say, let's do the ++ operator. Okay, so I'm going to come here in the declaration, and I'm going to say puppy dog, we'll talk about this in just a moment, operator ++ void, or we can just leave that blank. Now what this means is that this is the prefix operator. I am going to be changing, overloading the prefix operator, the prefix incrementer. And I could do the same thing with minus. So I'm going to say minus. So if there's nothing in the argument, if there's nothing in the parentheses of these functions right here, that means that it's the prefix. I know this is confusing. I know it's a pain in the neck, but that's the way it is. Okay, so let's now do the postfix operators. If I want to do the postfix operators, it gets even stranger. I put int in there. I don't have to name the variable. We're not going to use it. I put int, and this is the postfix. So it's that. And actually, I guess, because I have minus and I have plus together, but you get the idea. This is prefix, and this is postfix. Okay? So if you don't have a lot of experience with prefix and postfix, create a project, play around with it, learn how to use it. I gave a little introduction to it in this video, but that's how you do it. If you have an integer value variable or an integer value in the arguments list, it'll be postfix. If you've got void or nothing, it'll be prefix. So what I'm going to now do is I'm going to take these and I'm going to copy them. I'm going to save them first. I'm going to copy them into my CPP file. Okay, and then I'm going to copy the puppy dog : Okay, I can get rid of this comment if I want it. All right, so now let's go ahead and create our functions. There we go. Now our functions don't really do anything. But the first thing you want to do on the prefix and the postfix functions is that you actually want to return an object. If you notice, it says there it's going to return puppy dog. So you definitely want to return an object. And the way that you do, and this is the way it is, I'm just going to say return this. Now, asterisk this. Now what that means is it means I want to return the actual object that I'm in. And we'll see this in the debugger, but you want to do this in all of these. It's really kind of required, I believe. Okay, so that's just what you want to do. Okay, so now in the plus plus, what do we want to do? What do we want to do in the plus plus? What does the increment operator do? The increment operator always adds 1 to some numeric value. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say this dot, and let's see, weight in ounces equals this dot, weight in ounces plus 1. So it's going to add 1 to weight in ounces. Now, why did I do the equation like this? Just for effect, right? I could have done this. I could have said this dot, weight in ounces plus plus, but I didn't want to confuse you because I didn't want to say that I have an incrementer inside of the incrementer operator overload, right? So I just went ahead and did that. Okay, and I'm going to put that in all of these. Now you don't have to increment anything when you overload the increment operator or the decrement operator. You have to follow any rules other than the ones I've given you. You can put anything in the function you want, but we always want to subtract on the decrement, and we always want to increment on the increment. All right, let's go ahead and build that. Looks pretty good. Everything looks built. Okay. I think that's it. So let's go back into our main, and let's go ahead and increment us a puppy. So I'm going to say puppy1 plus plus. Now, if you remember, the last time we did this, plus plus, it added 1 to the address of puppy1. That's still what's going to happen here. It's still going to add 1 to the address. So before you issue an operator of any type, you want to dereference the object first. Very, very important. So you dereference the object, and then you say, I want to increment that object. And because I have plus plus there, and in my code I overrode the plus plus, in this case I believe this is the prefix and this is the postfix, it's going to execute that code. And we're going to debug that code. Okay, so let's go ahead and put another C out there. Let's now decrement it and see what our code looks like. And I'm going to put a C out here. Just so I don't get confused as to what. And let's change this. Let's. Okay. All right, let's make this window a little bit bigger. And let's see what we got. Okay, here's our overloaded increment and decrement test. Now, the puppy is 16 ounces before we start that test. We begin the test, we do the asterisk puppy in parentheses, that dereferences it first, and we say plus plus, it took 16, it added 1 to the puppy's weight. Perfect, our incrementing function worked. What about the decrement? Well, we went ahead and did the postfix decrement, and it's great. It decremented it by 1. Beautiful. So I believe that was the postfix that we tested. Let's test the prefix operator. Instead of putting plus plus after, we're going to put plus plus before. Same with minus minus. And let's put prefix here. Make sure our code's working, and then we can quickly debug it. All right, so here's the postfix, 1716 worked great. Here's the prefix, 1716 worked great. Awesome. So our plus plus and our minus minus is working. Let's debug this. I really love doing this. Let's go ahead and debug it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the CPP file. And again, this is Eclipse. Depending upon the IDE you're using, it'll debug a little bit differently. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a breakpoint on the first line of each one of my increment and decrement operator overloads. And let's go ahead and debug it. Okay, we're in our main. Let's go ahead and get some work done here. Get through all this other stuff. You can see the output down here. Pretty cool. Okay, so now we're going to say parentheses asterisk puppy1 parentheses plus plus. So we're going to dereference puppy1 to say I want the object to do something instead of the pointer, and then we're going to say plus plus. So instead of pressing the step over, I'm going to press the step into, and let's see which function is executing. There we are. So we are now in the postfix. The postfix plus plus, and it's going to add 1. It's going to return, and now we're back. So let's do the minus minus. Step into. There's the minus minus running. Perfectly great. Not sure what perfectly great means. Okay. So now let's do the prefix. Now remember, it was the bottom two functions. It was these two functions that were the postfix functions. Let's do the prefix functions now. There's my prefix, step into. Up, now it's up here. Instead of being down here, it's up in this function right here. How can I tell that? You can see that little arrow, that little blue arrow right there. A little bit difficult to see, but that's the current line of code we're in. We're going to step over, step into. And debugger's wonderful. If you don't know how to use a debugger, oh my goodness, watch more of my videos. They're so useful. And now I'm in the prefix for the puppy dog operator minus minus. Notice down here we never used this integer. You don't even have to, it's nothing. I think it's always 0. And we're done. So we're going to go ahead and continue. And there we go. Now I'm going to go into Window, Perspective, Open Perspective, C++, so we're back at our build window. All right, so that is operator overloading for incrementers and decrementers, both prefix and postfix. We did a little bit of a review of what the incrementers and decrementer operators are. I hope you enjoyed this video. Take a look at the next one coming very, very soon on actually overloading the addition, subtraction, multiplication, division mathematical operators from within C++. Hope to see you then.